Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of horns247.com, joined, of course, by my colleague Eric Henry, and we are excited to bring in today former Alabama quarterback Greg McElroy. Of course, you see him on ABC, ESPN. He's a college football analyst extraordinary. In fact, he handled the Texas-Kansas game, which is the reason we wanted to get Greg onto the Flagship Podcast with some fresh thoughts about the Longhorns heading into their Red River Shootout with Oklahoma. Greg, welcome into the Flagship Podcast.
I appreciate it, guys. I've went and made it a point to come find you, Chip, beforehand. You guys helped me get prepped last week. I've been listening to you guys. Like, I have all my little favorite teams and stuff, so I listened to the podcast, and you guys do a great job. So I appreciate y'all letting me come on. And if my opinion's in line with a lot of y'all's, it's probably because you helped me reach it.
Well,
the last several weeks. So
we'll take that. We'll take that. Greg, I love your analysis. You put a lot of time and effort into it. And so, wanted to get your thoughts after the Kansas game, after you'd seen them up close and personal, just how good you think this Longhorns football team is.
I think they're excellent. If anything, I actually on my own podcast today released a like re-ranking the top 25, kind of a first month report card, if you will. And I kind of was beating myself up over the fact that I was really high on Texas coming into the season, like really high, like was prepared to put them in like the top 3 because I felt like their roster was comparable to that of the unanimous top 2 in Georgia and Michigan. And I resisted because I had been told by everybody, well, we get burned by the Horns. How can you put them up there? And I didn't trust my gut, but you look at the roster and just kind of what was back and how they had been kind of preparing for this moment. I should have just followed my instinct and put them up there. But I think they've done kind of, I can't say I'm surprised at all. They've kind of done what I've expected them to do. They've improved all the areas that they had a year ago. They've been more consistent. And then you kind of look last year too. It was just a little bit circumstantial for them to finish the way they finished. You look at the score, you look at the record and you're like, well, but I don't want to, shed light on it, but like, let's look at the Texas Tech game. Like if Quinn Ewers is healthy, what's the result? Even the Alabama game last year, if Quinn Ewers is healthy, what's the result? And look, we know, especially when it comes to Texas quarterbacks getting hurt, like you can't focus on that. It's part of the game, and it's an unfortunate reality. But this team wasn't as bad as they seemed last year. They were really close, and they were really self-inflicted mistakes that led to the record being less than stellar. So can't say I'm surprised with what I've seen to this point. I do think there's holes, but they're smaller than pretty much everywhere else that you see right now in the sport.
Well, the holes, let's get into the holes because we got this undefeated showdown between Texas and Oklahoma. Where do you see the holes?
I think the biggest holes are in the secondary right now. I haven't seen an update, but if you guys can maybe enlighten me, is Ryan Watts good? Or is he okay? I haven't seen a recent update on whether or not he's going to be available this weekend, but let's start there.
He's still day to day.
Okay.
So
I didn't see anything in the game. I mean, he obviously limped off. Obviously, JT Sanders, his injury was a little more pronounced. So, but we kind of kept looking back. It's like, what did Watts do? So long story short, I think the secondary is where you get them. And that's okay because I'm looking and I'm preparing to call Georgia this weekend. And I think the secondary is where you get Georgia. Like, I think the corners are a question mark. I'm watching LSU Ole Miss corners, big question mark for LSU. I mean, I'm kind of looking all over the place, and really there's not a lot of great secondary players right now in college football. There's not that Darrelle Revis lockdown corner. So I think the spot where you have to get them is over the top. I think the safeties are excellent in run support, but I do think to an extent they're a bit of a liability in coverage. I love Jalen Catalon. Like, I think he's an amazing football player and one that's just so fun to watch, but he's a hitter. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to make the bang, bang play and knock the ball loose. And then sometimes he's going to knock it loose to the running back who scores, like we saw last week. I think Jaron Thompson is pretty good with his eyes. I think he's pretty instinctive. Obviously, had the interception against Alabama that broke the game open to kind of set things up. Also had the pick 6 against Wyoming. So I think he's very instinctive, but if you put him on an island, as evidenced by last week, big post, you don't get a reroute by the second level defender, and he's out the gate. So I do think the safeties are gettable, and I think you can get behind them in coverage. And I think on the outside, Baylor did it a couple times. They couldn't block anybody to save their life, but Baylor did it a couple times. They can win vertical behind these DBs. But I think that we're getting to the point now. I think Pete Kwiatkowski acknowledges this. I think Kirby Smart acknowledges this. All the best defensive coaches in college football. Nick Saban acknowledged this for a long time. If you look back at the 2019 LSU-Alabama game, the way Joe Burrow beat them is by throwing it over their head. Like, they're going to say, all right, most college quarterbacks aren't going to be able to make that throw. Like, that guy's going to miss it more than he's going to make it. So we'll roll the dice. If they throw it over our head, so be it. But you're not going to complete things underneath. You're not going to be able to complete back shoulders. You're going to complete the lower percentage throws. And if you do, so be it. So I think that's how you beat them. And the bad news is for Longhorns, I think that Oklahoma is capable of getting behind them and creating big plays.
Eric?
Greg, I kind of want to piggyback off, one of those things in terms of a weakness. And I just want to get your perspective on this. Texas has had some red zone struggles. Out of 21 red zone tries, they've had 14 touchdowns, 5 field goals. When Steve Sarkisian was asked about that during last week's presser after following the Kansas game, you kind of, no 5-0 coach wants to hear about a deficiency, right? They're talking about, hey, we're 5-0. You can make stats anything you want. But just want to get your perspective in a game like this where, it's probably Texas's toughest test to date. How much do you read into the fact that they've had some red zone inefficiencies and, potentially trading threes for sevens?
Well, I think part of it has to do with they didn't run the ball real well up until the last couple of weeks. In the red zone, you got to get the tough yardage. So I think that in the last couple of weeks, obviously, he's been a totally different animal. We know that Jonathan Brooks has really come into his own. We know the offensive line. And look, Michigan hasn't looked good up front. Alabama hasn't looked good up front. Georgia hasn't looked good up front. They've lost a tackle. Like nobody's offensive line is looking great right now, especially as far as run game is concerned. In September, if you look great running the football, it's like, all right, well, something's going to happen because it's just to gel that quickly, knowing how few practices you now have in fall camp. That group's usually a little bit behind, which is not super uncommon. So I'm not going to lose a ton of sleep over it because I do think they're rounding into form as far as being able to run against the competition that they're likely going to see in the Big 12. Now you get to a game against Michigan in the playoff. Yeah, I mean, that I'd be concerned. But for the most part, I think that they'll be okay given the level of competition that they'll have to play on a week-to-week basis in the Big 12. Like Cincinnati's got a great front. BYU's pretty decent up front. Kansas State obviously does a really good job up front. Oklahoma's improved up front. But we're not talking about the groups that you'll see when you get to the highest levels of the sport. So I do think that's part of it. I still think that Quinn Ewers is in the process of being more comfortable and anticipating throws. He's throwing the ball sooner. I actually had our ESPN stats and information folks track it throughout the game last week and really throughout the first 5 games of the year. He, on average, now, take it however you want. The average time that went between when he caught when the ball was snapped to when he released it in 2022 was 2.6 seconds. This year, he's around 2.3. And then actually against Baylor, it was his best performance of the year as far as getting the ball. It is 2.19. So he's doing a much better job of getting rid of the ball, being decisive, anticipating throws, and cleaning things up. And everything in the red zone happens faster. So I do think that that's a bit of a work in progress right now. He's still a young quarterback. I know he's started a lot of games. I know everyone looks at him. He's a third-year player. I know he's in NFL draft boards and stuff like that, but he's still pretty young. So maybe he's not seeing it quite as quickly as you'd like. I also think, too, in the red zone, A.D. Mitchell's a long target. I think he needs more looks in the red zone. Look, Xavier Worthy is an amazing, amazing weapon. But he's more of an open field weapon. He's not your red zone weapon in my eyes. Jatavion Sanders, red zone weapon for sure. I think involving some of the bigger bodies is going to be valuable. And then Whittington, I think he has 1 touchdown this year, maybe 0. I don't even know. He's been a non-factor down there too. So I think designing ways to get your bigger body receivers involved in the red zone will be valuable to him as they move forward as well.
Talking to Greg McElroy, ESPN college football analyst, of course, was the quarterback on the Alabama national championship team that beat Texas in 2009, about the last time that Texas was relevant in college football.
They're always relevant, Chip.
Well, they're always
whether they're good, whether they're good is a big.
The last time they were
right.
a factor in college football.
Right.
I couldn't believe it. I was looking it up. Texas has not beaten OU in consecutive years since 08, 09. And that is probably pretty telling about where Texas has been since that. But Greg, no question, Dylan Gabriel's the best quarterback that Texas has faced up to this point. And the receiving core for OU, Antrell Anthony coming in from Michigan, this kid Nick Anderson, who looks like Randy Moss. I don't know if he can, run like him or what, but he's got 5 touchdown catches already. Talk about that matchup, the Texas defense, if you think the OU offensive line can protect Dylan Gabriel enough, because their running game isn't where it's been, in recent years. How do you see that matchup?
I think that's the key. I mean, every time, if I had to game plan Texas's defense, like the biggest concern I have is, can we block them? Can we block them? Because I do believe that with how they roll players, I mean, they're playing a lot of guys. I mean, just a ton of substitutions. They have great depth on the front. I mean, on the depth chart that Sark handed to us, I know that they don't formally put out a depth chart, but there's 6 deep at every position. It's like, coach, come on, man. I haven't seen this guy all year. I think Anthony Hill's listed as a 3rd string Will. It's I see him a lot, so I don't know if necessarily the depth chart is a great indicator, but then you're looking through, it's oh, I got to add him. So I got 41, I got 88, I got 93, I got 90, I got 91, but you better be prepared for this. It's they just have a lot of guys that they're rolling in there. So they never really get to a point in which they're fatigued. They get off the field in a pretty good way too when they have to substitute against tempo teams. They're clearly comfortable using tempo to their advantage offensively, and it's clear that they work it in practice because substitutions have not been an issue for them, at least in the games that I've watched up to this point. So the first thing I would do when trying to game plan Texas, how do we block them? The guy that scares me to death is number 90, Byron Murphy, because there's not much you can do for an interior pass rusher. I mean, what do you do? Tell the running back to help your center? that ain't going to happen. So I need to know that my center can win that battle, which is a huge issue. I also know that number 88, Sorrell is a problem, a relentless guy. I know that I need to account for him. And if my tackles are susceptible to power rushers with some speed, I got to leave a tight over there to help, because I know that could be a problem. When they get in their 3rd down stuff and we get number 0 in the game, I know that number 0 is going to loop around and rush inside. They're going to create a game for him. And they're going to create a lot of traffic for him to get and use his speed, because he's not the guy that right now is going to create his own shot. He needs a pick and roll. If we're going to use basketball terms, he needs a pick and roll to get to the hoop right now. And maybe as he develops, he'll be able to create his own shot and can get to the hole against anybody, but he's not there just yet. So I know that those are the 3 guys that are keeping me up at night as far as the pass rush is concerned. As far as the run game is concerned, all right, I do not want to run at 93. He's too big. It's just, you're not going to go move him. He's too athletic for a guy that's 360, doesn't play that way. I mean, Tavondre Sweat, I think, has had a really good year. I know that I also need to be real mindful of getting to the second level, because Ford is so quick and so instinctive. He's going to get where he needs to go to make sure that if 93 can eat a couple blockers, then that means 41 is free and he's going to make the play. So I got to account for him, which means I'm probably going to run on the perimeter a lot. That's where I'd live. I'm not trying to run it up the middle on these guys. I have to do it just to keep them honest, but that's not where it's going to happen. And then I have to move the pocket. So I'd probably do with a lot of bootlegs. I'd probably do a lot of misdirection, jet sweep running right to left, fake the jet sweep, get the linebackers flowing, and then boot the other direction. I'm going to go sprint outs, and I'm going to try to, as best I can, change the launch angle for my quarterback. Dylan Gabriel's not a tall guy. You don't want him just living in the pocket. You want to move him a little bit and get him off the spot. And that way, if he's unpredictable where he's setting up to throw, the pass rushers won't be able to rush to the same spot every single time. So that's kind of what I would do to try to neutralize that pass rush, because let's be real. I don't care if you have Oklahoma out there or the Philadelphia Eagles, who are the best offensive line maybe of all time. You're not going to be able to block these guys for 70 plays in the game. It's just they're gonna get free, and they're gonna get some shots, and they're gonna win some one-on-ones. So I think you got to be real smart about how you game plan against them, and not give them the same look too often, because they'll start to tee off and obviously get you in less than stellar situations.
All right, let's grab a quick break here on the Flagship Podcast, talking to Greg McElroy. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on real quickly. Greg, Brent Venables carries a lot and uses it. Steve Sarkisian carries a lot. Both of these guys have a philosophy of the more we can do, the harder we are to defend. Can you talk about that matchup, that, Brent Venables, what he's bringing with this OU defense?
Well, the one thing I will say about playing against Brent Venables, and I never played against him, but I've studied him enough, whether it be at Clemson or Oklahoma, or just studied him over the years and seen him play and call a lot of games. I think the one thing that's difficult with him is he's a defense that wants to dictate. He wants to overload your protections. He wants to get a beat on your signals. And if you adjust, he's going to adjust. He has really smart linebackers. That's like a bread and butter staple dating all the way back to his time at Clemson. Like, he has really smart linebackers that get you into the right situation. And if he has a pressure, he wants a pressure called. It's just what side is the pressure coming from, and which of the two guys or three guys that he's going to bring. So that's coming. You got to be really good with your overloads. He's going to overload your protection. So you got to understand where your outlets are as a quarterback. You got to know where your quick throws are. But I would think in a game like this, I would think that Brent Venables probably going to play it a little bit more conservatively. That's what I would do if I were him. Because if you all of a sudden try to start teeing off, and all of a sudden you start trying to heat up Quinn and force Quinn into mistakes, which I think that's a good plan, by the way. That's what I would do. But I also know that if I get overly aggressive, I get burned. Now I'm playing from behind, and now we're in a tough spot. So I do think it's very, very important for him to kind of maybe play it close, get a feel for how the game's going to be played, see how his offense does. Because if this all of a sudden becomes a track meet, then you can get more aggressive, because your offense, you're confident in your own offense and being able to score. So I think he's probably going to be conservative, bend don't break early on, and then adjust as he kind of figures out how his offense is going to be able to move the ball. So it's going to be a great game of cat and mouse. And two great minds on their side of the ball with what Sark does and how he creates formations and how he motions and creates matchups. And he's going to get your one-on-ones. He's going to get his shots. But now he's complementing the run game with it as well. So I think the first thing for Venables, stop the run, 100%. Have to stop the run. If Jonathan Brooks gets off, it's over. I mean, it's as simple as that. If he goes for 150, it's just, it's going to be really hard to beat Texas if they can create that balance, because they're going to have some explosive plays down the field. So I think he'll start out selling out against the run and probably not overpowering the Texas team with pressures, and just kind of see how it figures out. And then second quarter, that's when I'd get ready to ratchet up some of the pressure and start to see where things are going to go.
Eric?
Greg, the status of Texas tight end Jatavian Sanders, Steve Sarkisian told us on Monday. We get an update on Thursday, so still up in the air to see whether or not he will play. But I want to ask you, what did you make of Texas's offense without him on the field? Something I've written about extensively on the site is Texas' usage of 12 personnel, usually with Sanders and a reserve tight end Gunnar Helm, but they were able to do it with Gunnar Helm and Malik Agbo. Just want to get your thoughts on Texas without JT and their 12 personnel look.
Well, I think Ogbo is interesting, and before him, it was South Lake boy Andre Carrick, right? So I think I like the jumbo tight end. I always have liked it. I think it just gives you a presence on the edge that is difficult to account for. I think it takes a different skill set. It takes a different guy that's willing to do it. Ogbo's obviously willing to be that guy. But against Kansas, you need the hammer. because they're a team that you can out physical. They're just not as big. They're not as deep. And at that point, when he started playing extensive snaps, I think at that point, they had been on the field like 60 snaps, so they were running on empty as far as their fumes, because they just don't roll guys the way Texas does. So I think that's an important piece in this game. But if Venables does a good job with substitutions, you put a jumbo tight end in there with Gunnar Helm, you're going to get big body personnel on defense. If I'm Texas, I want to play more in 11 this week. I want one tight end, one running back, 3 wide receivers, because then Brent Venables will play his nickel and 5 DBs in the field and just a little bit more predictable look. And I would try to run it out of 11 and throw it out of 12. That's what I would do. Against some of these defensive coordinators that are very specific with their substitutions, that's how I attack it. Against Kansas, they're going to play their 11 guys. It's what they do. Like, their 11 guys are going to play. They only have 11 players that they really roll. So you're not going to get as many substitutions. So I would get in 12 and run it down their throat. But with this group, because they do have some situational specific players, I think 12 is your passing group and 11 is your running group, and specifically 12 with Ogbo in the game. I'd love for JT Sanders to be available. I just think he's a bigger matchup nightmare than Gunnar Helm, who has progressed. I got to give him credit. He's gotten a lot better. But I would love it if JT was available this week. I just, based on how I'm not a doctor. It looked like a high ankle sprain to me based on how he went down. It wasn't that dissimilar to what we saw with Duke's quarterback a little later in the day last weekend, just kind of get rolled up on the inside. I'd be surprised if he's full go. He might play, but I can't imagine he's going to be the Ja'Tavion Sanders that we see on a week-to-week basis.
Greg, how do you see this one playing out?
I think it's going to be a really uncomfortable game for both teams. I think Texas is in. It's a weird situation because for the first time in a long time, it feels like Texas has everything to lose, and Oklahoma, even though they're 5-0, is playing with house money. It's very strange. Because I would think like both teams are 5-0. They both have a lot to lose, but everyone's circled this year for Texas. Like, this is the year, this is the year, this is the year. So I just want to see them come out and perform freely without any pressure whatsoever. But I think it's going to be a little tight because if I'm Oklahoma, I'm taking the ball. And if I win the toss, I'm taking the ball. I want to put Dalen Gabriel out there. I want to create some big plays, and hopefully Quinn Ewers won't take the field until they're down 7-0. If I'm Oklahoma, that's my play. This is one of those weird games where I think the coin toss is actually really important. You will break this thing down in every possible way over the next few days. I know you guys will too, but I would take the ball. Whoever gets the ball first, I think, does have a little bit of an advantage, especially as far as the mindset goes in this one. But I think it's going to come down to the wire. I mean, I think Texas is deeper. People have questions about Oklahoma's defense after how they played in the first half against Iowa State last week. But I go back and I look at it, and it was really 3 plays that kind of broke it open. They gave up like 160 yards on 3 plays. And that's, if they do that, they're in trouble. But they really buttoned down the hatches after the first quarter and a half or so. And, they went however many minutes in a row without allowing hardly anything defensively. So they settled down a little bit. But I think they'll have a great plan. I mean, there's no doubt this one's been circled for a year. I called the game last year and it was a complete beatdown. So knowing that they've had all off season to hear about the worst loss in the history of the Red River rivalry and the worst performance as a team since 1998, this is a big one for them. And I think just to show progress, I think Texas gets it, but I think it's within a touchdown. I think this game's coming down to the wire. And I would expect it to be, everyone thinks it's going to be super high scoring. I don't necessarily see it that way. I think that both teams are understanding that, hey man, a mistake could blow this thing open. They're going to be aggressive, but cautious in the shots and the one-on-ones they try to take advantage of. And every drive that ends in a kick could be a good one. So I'm kind of thinking in the vicinity of I kind of see it like a 31-27 Texas is kind of how I see it. And that's obviously under the assumption that Burt Auburn nails one, which has not necessarily been a guarantee the last couple of weeks. So kind of thinking like 31-27 Texas and what should be a back and forth and a really impressive game. I think it's good and important for the sport for both teams to look good in this one on Saturday.
Eric?
Greg, just one quick follow-up in terms of my question earlier with the red zone. I do want to ask you this, and it does sound that you feel pretty confident that Texas will get the red zone struggles worked out. But just, hypothetically speaking, let's say it's a struggle all year. Do you feel that it's sustainable that Texas's offense in terms of the big plays, whether it be via Jonathan Brooks or an A.D. Mitchell or Xavier Worthy, we've seen, a lot of those chunk plays all year. Do you believe that's sustainable for the, long haul?
Well, one thing that I would strongly consider, and look, I'm not trying to tell Steve Sarkisian how to call offense. Like that guy's forgotten more offensive football than I've ever learned or known. But one thing that I've seen a lot of teams do that are struggling in the red zone, they put in a more dynamic quarterback for a quarterback run. And we know Quinn Ewers has been, willing to run the football this year, but he's not Malik Murphy. So maybe that's something that if it continues and if it continues to be a bit of a storyline, put Malik in there and let's see if on design quarterback runs with an extra blocker, which forces you to have an extra hat in the box, and design quarterback runs, can he maybe create a little bit? I'd put that guy in there for quarterback. I'd have a package for him anyways. I don't know why he doesn't have a package right now. He might have one. And maybe we just haven't seen it and they're saving it for a rainy day. But I'd get that guy involved just as a runner. Design quarterback runs and just see if you can't maybe create an extra hat on a hat to account for as the field condenses. So that's what I would do. That would be my changeup if it continues to be an issue.
All right, Greg. Last thing, I promise. The 2009 National Championship game. What a wild scene for Texas fans, especially. But it was, I think Mac Brown feels like he had the team to get it done. They didn't. What stands out to you in terms of memories about that game? It was obviously a magical night for the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Well, I mean, there's so many things that stand out. It was an emotional game for a lot of us. Well, I mean, I knew Colt, so Colt and I went back to high school and had gotten to know him over the years. So I was bummed that he got hurt. Obviously, that was a bummer. But the game just completely flipped when that went down. We basically kind of said, "All right, we're not even going to try to throw it. Let's just run the ball." We had a decided advantage at the line of scrimmage running the football. We knew that. They made some adjustments in the second half, and we didn't necessarily counterpunch the way we probably should have, looking back at it. But it was when you get Texas and Alabama in a national championship game, like you want it to be good on good. And unfortunately for Texas, like they were playing pretty much the whole game with one arm tied behind their back. No disrespect to Garrett Gilbert, but that was just not going to be a fair fight. I mean, we didn't even do anything offensively. And we were able to score 37 because we got the short field the whole time. And we had all these cool plays in. I'm still kind of disappointed we didn't get to use any of them. They're like, bootleg setup, throwbacks, and like double moves with Marquise Mays, our speed guy, to get Blake Gideon, who's now a safeties coach, in a one-on-one. And it was like we had a lot of cool stuff that we didn't even try because it really wasn't beneficial to try. Why involve Earl Thomas in the game if you don't have to? Or Aaron Williams, who was a really good corner, and Julio, had a tough draw that day against Aaron. So, it was a little anticlimactic in a way, because Texas was my childhood team, and I wanted to beat them at full strength. And I had several friends and family that were up there wearing orange, not family, but a lot of friends that were wearing burnt orange that night, and you certainly felt for them, but it was fun to restore glory to a program that had been kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, average for the better part of 2 decades. And to see now what it's become, it's obviously been very special. And the championship too, like when you're in it, you just did your job. You know what I mean? It's like we won, like we did our job. Like it was like we're almost more relieved than we were happy. You know what I mean? It's like, well, we're relieved. This is great. We did it. Let's go back to work tomorrow and clean up some of the things we didn't do so well. So there was a sense of relief after the game. but it's really gotten sweeter with time, because I've seen great teams in recent years fail, and we didn't. So I think it's one of those that I've grown to appreciate it more over the course of the last 10 years than maybe it was the night that we actually brought it home. So it's a special thing. It's a career defining moment, and I will always be a national championship winning quarterback, which is pretty special. There's not a lot of guys that had that designation. I'm very, very grateful to have been a part of a team that was able to bring one home, for sure, even though it was obviously against a team that, I always still annually cheer for and always want the best for.
Well, you do an excellent job. And it's so much fun to get the chance to talk to you, because I think you really put in the work, and really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
I appreciate you guys. Thank y'all for having me. Thanks for all your great work, man. Look forward to seeing you guys again soon.
All right. For Greg McElroy, for Eric Henry, I am Chip Brown. Thanks for listening to the Flagship Podcast. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.